They say desperation sharpens the eyes. I'd been walking the county road for 3 days with my daughter Maya, 7 years old and trusting me like I still deserved it, when I saw the edge of something wooden jutting from the tall grass of an abandoned field. Not trash. Too deliberate. Too square. It was a door, half buried, weathered gray as bone, with an iron ring for a handle. Maya was tired. Our tent had ripped 2 nights before, and the shelters in town were full until Monday. I'd spent our last grocery money on her new school shoes. The old ones had holes you could see her socks through. We had $73 left, a duffel bag of clothes, and one shared sleeping bag that smelled like mildew and rain and all the nights we'd spent in places we weren't supposed to be. The field belonged to nobody, or everybody, the kind of forgotten acre between properties that gets swallowed by Queen Anne's lace and blackberry bramble. A rusted for sale sign leaned in the ditch, so faded you could barely read the phone number. The grass came up to Maya's shoulders, and the cicadas were starting their evening song, that rising electric hum that makes summer feel both endless and urgent. I stood there, Maya's hand in mine, staring at that door like it was asking me a question I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. Behind us, the road stretched empty in both directions. Ahead of us, nothing but the unknown. "What is it, Dad?" she whispered, her voice carrying that careful tone kids use when they're scared but don't want to admit it. "I don't know yet," I said, but I knew we were going to find out, because when you have nowhere else to go, every door starts looking like possibility. Chapter 1. The Door and the Descent. I pulled at the iron ring. The door resisted at first, stuck with years of soil and root growth, then gave with a groan that sent a puff of cool, mineral-scented air into my face. The hinges screamed like they'd been waiting decades to speak. Beneath it, wooden steps descended into darkness. Steep, hand-hewn, each one carved from a single piece of timber, older than anything I'd seen outside a museum. "Is it a dungeon?" Maya asked, her voice small and tight with the kind of fear that comes from too many scary stories and not enough real answers. "It's a root cellar," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. People used them before refrigerators existed. To store food, keep things cool in summer, prevent freezing in winter. I was talking more to calm myself than to educate her, filling the silence with words, so the darkness wouldn't feel so absolute. The stairs were solid. I tested each one with my full weight before letting Maya follow. One hand on her shoulder, the other braced against the earthen wall. The wood was dry and sound, surprisingly preserved by the cool underground air. At the bottom, maybe 10 feet down, the space opened into a small room. Earthen walls shored up with timber beams that still smelled faintly of pine sap and thyme. A dirt floor swept clean by decades of stillness and the complete absence of human presence. It was cool down there, maybe 60 degrees even though the day above had been pushing 90. The air had weight to it, a density that pressed against my ears and made me suddenly aware of my own breathing, my own heartbeat. Maya stood close to me, her hand finding mine in the dimness. There was a wooden shelf along one wall, empty except for the ghost outlines where jars might once have stood. A tin lantern hung from a nail driven into one of the beams, rusted through at the bottom but still clinging to its post like it remembered its purpose. The ceiling was low enough that I had to duck slightly. The beams crossed at irregular intervals, each one fitted with the kind of precision that comes from necessity and skill rather than power tools and measurements. And in the corner, tucked against the junction where 2 walls met, sat a metal box the size of a bread loaf, its surface pitted with age, but still solid. It had a simple latch, no lock, just a hook that lifted free with the gentlest pressure. I opened it carefully, half expecting the contents to crumble at the touch of fresh air. Inside, cushioned by what looked like the remains of a cloth sack, were 2 things: a folded piece of paper, brittle and yellowed like old newsprint, and a ring of keys on a loop of rotted string that fell apart as I lifted it. The paper crackled as I unfolded it. The handwriting was careful, each letter formed with the deliberate precision of someone who'd learned penmanship in an era when such things mattered. The ink had faded to sepia, but I could still read every word. "To whoever finds this, the land is paid for. Deed is with Lawson County Clerk. Parcel 447B. 2 acres more or less. Forgive what I couldn't finish. The foundation is sound. The well still draws sweet. May you have better luck than we did. E.M." The date at the bottom said April 18th, 1953. Maya looked up at me, her face barely visible in the dim light filtering down from above. "Does that mean we can live here?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at the walls. the beam still holding strong after 70 years. The cool, dry air that didn't smell like rain or car exhaust or other people's cigarettes or the particular desperation of shelter waiting rooms. I thought about the $73 in my pocket, the duffel bag waiting up in the grass, the ripped tent that wasn't coming back from its last fight with the wind. I thought about the schools Maya had already been to this year, 3 different buildings in 3 different towns, always starting over, always the new kid, always leaving before anyone could get attached. Maybe, I said finally, carefully refolding the note and placing it back in the metal box. If it's true, if the deed is really there, if we can figure out what comes next. The keys were old, heavy iron things with long shanks and complicated teeth, keys to doors that might not exist anymore, locks that might have rusted away decades ago. But I put them in my pocket anyway because when you have nothing, everything starts to feel like something worth keeping. Chapter 2. The Claim. The county clerk's office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, and the particular mustiness that accumulates in government buildings where the ventilation has been inadequate for 50 years. The woman behind the desk was 60 or thereabouts, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and skepticism carved into every line of her weathered face. She'd seen people like me before, desperate, grasping at straws, hoping that paperwork and legal technicalities might somehow translate into salvation. Parcel 447B, I said, sliding the note across the counter with the careful reverence of someone handling a winning lottery ticket that might actually be counterfeit. I need to know who owns it, what the status is, whether there's any way to... She held up one hand, cutting me off with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd heard every variation of every property story 1,000 times before. Let me look it up first. No sense speculating until we know what we're dealing with. She typed slowly, squinting at her screen through the reading glasses, her fingers finding keys with the deliberate hunt and peck method of someone who'd learned computers late in life and never quite made peace with them. Minutes passed. Maya sat in one of the plastic chairs along the wall, swinging her legs, her backpack on her lap, watching the second hand make its slow circuit around the clock on the wall. Interesting, the clerk said finally, which wasn't the word I'd been hoping for but was better than impossible or you're wasting my time. Says here it's held in probate, she continued, reading from the screen with one finger tracing the lines. Owner, that would be Emmett James Monroe, died April 1953. No heirs came forward to claim the estate. Property sat dormant. Taxes went delinquent in 2019. County's been holding it waiting to see if anyone surfaces or if we can sell it for back taxes. She looked at me over her glasses, assessment and calculation happening behind her eyes. Are you related to Emmett Monroe? Because if you're claiming inheritance, that's a whole different process and you'll need... No, ma'am, I interrupted. No relation. Never heard the name before I found that note. Then it's not yours, she said flatly. Can't just walk onto someone else's property and plant a flag even if nobody's been there in 70 years. That's not how it works. I felt the disappointment like a physical weight settling on my shoulders, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. But then she leaned back in her chair, the vinyl creaking, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite sympathy, but maybe recognition. However, she said, drawing the word out, county's been trying to offload delinquent parcels. Budget cuts, you understand. Less overhead, more efficiency, all that administrative nonsense that means we're trying to get property back on the tax rolls. This parcel, it's 2 acres, mostly scrub. No structures reported in the last assessment, which would have been... She scrolled through more screens. 2003, last time anyone looked at it officially. Assessed value's $800, which tells you what the county thinks it's worth. She pulled up another screen, typed something, waited. Back taxes would run you $372. Filing fees for adverse possession if you can prove continuous occupancy. That's another $150. You'd need to show you're improving it, maintaining it, treating it like your own. After 7 years of that, you could file for title or... She paused, considering. You could try to buy it outright at the tax sale next month. Starting bid would be back taxes plus fees plus 10%. Call it $600 even. I did the math in my head, comparing it against the $73 folded in my wallet. 600 might as well have been $6 million. Thank you, I said quietly, taking back the note and refolding it along its ancient creases. I appreciate you looking. Wait, she said as I turned to go. She was writing something on a post-it note, her handwriting surprisingly neat. This is the legal aid office. They take walk-ins on Thursday mornings. Tell them Diane from County Clerk sent you. They might have ideas about adverse possession procedures, squatters' rights, that kind of thing. No promises, but she shrugged, handing me the note. Sometimes the law has loopholes for people willing to do the work. Outside, the afternoon sun was brutal after the air-conditioned office. Maya squinted up at me, waiting. What does all that mean? She asked. It means, I said, folding the post-it note and tucking it into my pocket next to the keys. We have work to do. A lot of work. And we need to start right now. That night, we slept in the root cellar for the first time. I hung the torn tent tarp over the door opening to keep out the dew and any curious animals. Maya curled up in the sleeping bag on the driest patch of dirt floor, and I sat with my back against one of the support beams. The battery-powered lantern turned to its lowest setting, thinking about Emmett Monroe and Betty, and what they couldn't finish, and why anyone would walk away from 2 acres of paid-off land. In the morning, before Maya woke up, I started digging. Chapter 3. The Foundation. The door wasn't the only thing buried. 20 feet from the cellar entrance, hidden beneath decades of blackberry bramble and Virginia creeper, and the kind of aggressive plant growth that happens when humans stop imposing their will on the landscape, I found the outline of a foundation, mortared stone, hand-laid, mostly collapsed, but with enough structure remaining to understand what had been there. It had been a small house, maybe 12 feet by 20, the stones fitted with skill and patience. River rocks, most of them, smoothed by water and time before someone dug them from a creek bed and hauled them here and stacked them with mortar mixed from sand and lime and sweat. One corner still stood, a chimney made of carefully selected stone that tapered as it rose, each course slightly smaller than the last, engineered by someone who understood weight and balance without needing textbooks to explain it. I needed tools. I had the $73, which represented every bit of cash I'd accumulated from odd jobs and one emergency plasma donation, and the $10 bill Maya had found in a parking lot and insisted on contributing to our house fund. Not enough to buy anything significant, certainly not enough to rent equipment or hire help, but I could trade labor. The man at the feed store on the edge of town was maybe 50, leather-skinned from decades of sun, with forearms like ship rope and eyes that evaluated me in about 3 seconds. You need something? He asked. Not unfriendly, but not warm either. I need to borrow a machete, I said. Maybe some work gloves if you have extras. I can't pay, but I'll clean your gutters, move inventory, whatever needs doing. I'm good for it. He looked at me for a long moment, then at Maya standing beside me, her hand in mine. Gutters are clogged, he said finally. Been meaning to get to them. Take me 4 hours to do it myself. Probably take you longer. You do that. You can keep the machete. Gloves too if they fit. Deal? It took me 6 hours. The gutters ran around the entire building, packed solid with decomposed leaves and mud nests and 30 years of accumulated debris. My shoulders screamed. My hands cramped. Maya sat in the shade of the building, reading a library book about birds, occasionally bringing me water in a paper cup. When I finished, the feed store owner inspected the work, nodded once, and disappeared into the back room. He came out with the machete, old but freshly sharpened, handle worn smooth from use, and a pair of leather work gloves that were stiff with age but still intact. You're working on the old Monroe place, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Good luck, he said. Emmett was a decent man. Deserves better than 40 years of brambles. I cleared the brush in sections, working in the early mornings before the heat became unbearable, and in the evenings when the sun dropped low enough to take the edge off. Maya helped when she could, pulling the lighter vines after I cut them, stacking stones that had tumbled away from the foundation, gathering what she called treasures, artifacts of the house that had been. She found things constantly. A rusted hinge still attached to a piece of rotted wood, a blue glass bottle intact, the kind that once held medicine or perfume, nails bent into curves by time and weight, a spoon with a bent handle. Each discovery was announced with excitement, examined, catalogued in her mind's museum of the past. Dad, she said one afternoon, maybe 3 days into the clearing work. She was holding up a flat rectangle of metal, brushing dirt away with her small fingers. Look at this. It was a license plate, Oregon, 1949. The paint had mostly flaked away, leaving behind ghost images of letters and numbers, but enough remained to read. JX4739. I took it from her, turning it over in my hands. The metal was pitted with rust, but surprisingly intact, protected somehow by the particular conditions of this soil, this place. Someone lived here, Maya said, her voice full of the wonder that comes from connecting present evidence to past lives. They had a car. They drove places. Yeah, I said, imagining a vehicle from 1949. Probably a Ford or Chevrolet, rounded fenders, running boards. The kind of car you see in old photographs looking impossibly elegant and improbably simple. Someone did. By the end of the first week, I'd cleared enough space to see the full foundation. The stones were good. Solid limestone that would outlast me and probably outlast Maya's children if she ever had them. The mortar was harder to judge. Much of it had crumbled, but the base courses held firm. In one corner, carved into the mortar before it had fully set, I found initials, EM and BM, scratched inside a rough heart shape, the kind of permanent declaration of impermanent feelings that people make when they believe the future will match their hopes. Emmett Monroe and someone else, someone whose name started with B, someone he'd loved enough to carve into stone. If you're enjoying this journey so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Chapter 4, Rebuilding from Nothing. I had $38 left after buying Maya the school supplies she needed. Notebooks, pencils, a backpack that wasn't falling apart. She was starting at Lincoln Elementary on Monday, which meant regular hours, which meant I'd have dedicated work time but also the pressure of making this place actually livable before winter. The root cellar was dry and cool, but it wasn't a home. It was a hole in the ground with wooden stairs and earthen walls, fine for emergency shelter but not for living. Maya needed space, privacy, normalcy. She needed a door she could close and walls that didn't smell like damp earth and decades of absence. I needed materials. Lumber, nails, roofing tar, something to keep the rain out when the storms came. With $38 I could buy maybe one sheet of plywood and a handful of nails, which wasn't going to build anything resembling a structure. I walked into town, left Maya with a woman at the library who'd gotten friendly after we'd been there 3 days in a row, and found a construction site where they were tearing down an old dairy barn. The foreman was a big man with sun-scorched arms and a squint that came from 30 years of outdoor work. His crew was sorting through the demolition debris, salvaging what looked useful, piling the rest for the dump truck. "I'll haul your scrap for free," I told him, trying to sound confident and professional instead of desperate. "Anything you're throwing away, I'll take it off your hands. Save you disposal fees." He looked me over with the casual assessment of someone who'd hired and fired 100 men and could read character in 30 seconds. "You got a truck?" "I've got a wheelbarrow," I said. He laughed, but not meanly. His crew laughed too, but there was sympathy in it. "Where are you taking it?" "Old Monroe Place, out on County Road 12. Something shifted in his expression. "Emmett's land? You got claim to it?" "Working on it," I said, which was technically true. He thought for a moment, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, you haul it, you keep it, but do it clean. I don't want nails and splinters all over my site. And don't leave a mess." "Yes, sir." For 3 days I made trips, 2 miles each way, the wheelbarrow loaded with salvaged boards, some warped but usable, some split but good for bracing, all of them carrying the particular smell of old wood and animal occupation and time. Bent nails that I straightened at night using a rock as an anvil, and the back of the machete as a hammer. Shingles that were still half good, with years of life left in them. Sections of wire fence, hinges, a door frame, window frames without glass. Maya walked beside me when she wasn't in school, carrying a bucket of smaller pieces, hardware, brackets, lengths of chain, anything that seemed potentially useful. We must have looked like something out of the Depression, scavengers picking through the ruins of someone else's prosperity, trying to build something from nothing. People noticed. In small towns, everything gets noticed. The woman at the gas station, Carla, her name tag said, asked what I was building when I stopped for water one afternoon. When I told her, explained about the foundation and the root cellar and Emmett Monroe's note, she disappeared into the back room and came out with a cardboard box. "Canned goods," she said, setting it on the counter. "Dented cans, expired dates, stuff I can't sell but is perfectly fine to eat. And this," she added, a battery-powered lantern, the kind that runs on D-cells, "for the little one. Kids shouldn't be reading by candlelight or whatever you're using down there." "I can't," I started. "You can," she said firmly. "And you will, because that's what people do. Now get going before I change my mind." With the salvaged wood, I framed a single wall against the standing chimney, 8 feet by 6 feet, just enough for a basic lean-to. I stretched the tarp for a roof, securing it with boards and stones and all the improvisation I could manage, used foundation stones to anchor the corners, digging them into the soil until they hit something solid. It wasn't much. It wasn't even close to code, whatever building code might have existed out here, But when the rain came that night, a sudden storm that blew in from the west, all thunder and lightning and water that fell in sheets, we stayed dry. Maya sat cross-legged on the sleeping bag. The battery lantern Carla had given us glowing steady and bright between us, and smiled the first real smile I'd seen in weeks. "It's like a fort," she said. "It's a start," I told her. And for the first time since we'd been on the road, I actually believed it. Chapter 5. The Hidden Cache. The beam in the root cellar had a seam. I noticed it one morning when I was checking the ceiling for signs of rot or insect damage, running my hands along the timber to understand what we were working with, whether the structure was sound enough to last through winter, or if I needed to start thinking about reinforcement. My fingers found a gap, subtle, barely visible even when I knew it was there, like two boards fitted together but not quite flush. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking, if you weren't touching every inch of wood with the paranoid attention of someone whose shelter depends on its integrity. I pried at it with the screwdriver I'd found in the barn scrap pile. The seam widened, revealing not a structural flaw but a deliberate construction. The two boards were separate pieces, and one of them moved. Behind it, hollowed into the timber itself, carved out with tools and patience, was a space about the size of a shoebox. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had gone stiff with age but still provided protection, was a bundle tied with twine that crumbled at my touch. I unwrapped it carefully, slowly, aware that I was handling something that hadn't seen daylight in 7 decades. The oilcloth fell away in pieces. Inside were photographs, black and white, some touched with color tint in the style of the early 50s, when such things were done by hand. A young man in overalls and a work shirt, lean and dark-haired, with eyes that looked directly at the camera like he was comfortable being seen. Beside him, a woman in a floral dress, her hair curled in the fashion of the time, her hand resting on his arm, her smile genuine and unguarded. They were standing in front of the stone foundation when it was new, when the mortar was still fresh and the future looked certain. The house behind them was small but whole, with a porch and a window box full of flowers I couldn't identify without color. On the back of one photo in faded pencil that had somehow survived the decades, Emmett and Betty, June 1951, first summer. There were more photos. The house in various stages of completion, the chimney being built. A vegetable garden, neat rows visible even in black and white. The two of them on the porch, older now, the date on the back saying 1952. Betty looked thinner in that one, her smile more fragile, like something was taking energy she didn't have to spare. And there were letters, a dozen of them, maybe more, still in their envelopes, addressed to Emmett Monroe at this address, but with a return address in Portland, Oregon. The stamps were 3 cents each, the postmark readable, 1953 January through March. I didn't read them all. They were private, intimate, none of my business despite being hidden in my ceiling. But I read enough to understand the story they told. Betty had been sick, something serious. Something that required treatment they couldn't get in rural Oregon in 1953. Emmett had taken her to Portland, to the hospital there, and then stayed to work while she received care. The letters were hers, written to him while he worked double shifts at a lumber mill to pay the medical bills, sending money back to Portland while trying to keep the property from being foreclosed. "The doctors say I'm responding well," one letter said, "but the costs keep mounting. Don't worry about me. You take care of the land, our home. When I get back, we'll finish what we started." Another, dated February. "I miss the quiet. I miss the sound of the creek. I miss watching you work on the porch. They say I need another month here, maybe 2. Keep writing. Your letters are better than medicine." The last letter was dated March 17, 1953. The handwriting was shakier, the lines uneven. "Emmett, I'm not afraid of what's coming. You gave me a home, a life better than I ever thought I'd have, and that's more than most people get in 80 years. If I don't come back to the land, if this is where my road ends, I need you to know. Finish what we started. Don't let it go to weeds in memory. Someone will need it someday. Someone will find it and understand what it means to have a place. Plant the beans, fix the porch, live the life we planned, even if you have to live it for both of us. I love you. B." I sat there in the cool darkness of the root cellar, the photos spread out on the dirt floor, the letters back in their envelopes, and felt the weight of 70 years pressing down. Emmett had buried these here, hidden them away like treasure, and then left. Couldn't finish. Couldn't stay in the house they'd built together. Couldn't live in the space that had been shaped by her hands and her voice and her presence. "Dad?" Maya's voice came from above, calling down the stairs. "What are you doing?" "Finding history," I said, my voice rough. "Come see." She descended carefully, one step at a time, and sat beside me. I showed her the photos, explained what I'd learned. "That's sad," she said quietly, looking at Betty's face in the photograph. "Yeah," I agreed, "but also beautiful. They loved each other. They built something together, and now we get to finish it." Chapter 6. The Storm and the Test. The weather turned on a Thursday in late September. I'd been working on the lean-to, adding a second wall and a proper door frame salvaged from the barn site, when the sky started changing color, first to a peculiar yellow-green that made everything look wrong, then to the kind of dark gray that carries weight and warning. "Dad," Maya called from the cellar entrance where she'd been doing homework in the battery lantern's light. "It smells like rain." It wasn't just rain. The wind started first, pulling at the tarp roof, testing the boards I'd anchored, finding every weak point in my amateur construction. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. Birds went silent. The air itself felt wrong, charged with the particular electricity that comes before serious weather. I got the tools inside just as the first drops hit. Not drops, really. More like gravel thrown from above, heavy and cold and mean. Within 2 minutes, it was a downpour. The kind of rain that turns dirt roads into rivers and pulls nails out of green lumber and finds its way through any gap larger than a hair. I secured the tarp as best I could, weighting the edges with foundation stones, using extra boards as battens, working in the driving rain while Maya watched from the safety of the cellar. But the wind was relentless, gusting to what must have been 40 or 50 miles per hour, pulling at everything I'd built with patient, systematic force. Water poured through gaps I hadn't known existed. The ground around the foundation turned to slick mud within minutes. I watched helplessly as one corner of the lean-to began to sag, the temporary supports I'd built from salvaged 2x4s bending under the weight of wind and water. "Dad!" Maya shouted over the roar of rain and thunder. "Get down here." I abandoned the fight and descended into the cellar, soaked through, shaking from cold and adrenaline. Above us, the storm hammered at the door, at the ground, at everything. Water ran down the steps in rivulets, but the cellar itself stayed dry. Emmett Monroe's handiwork holding strong 7 decades later. Inside, Maya and I huddled in the sleeping bag, listening to the storm roar overhead. The battery lantern flickered once, making my heart jump, then steadied. The walls groaned under the weight of saturated earth. The support beams creaked. Wind found its way down the stairwell, carrying the smell of ozone and wet vegetation and violence. "What if it falls?" Maya whispered, her voice small and young and scared in a way that broke something in my chest. "It won't," I said, wrapping my arm around her shoulders, trying to sound certain. "This cellar's been here 70 years. It's seen worse than this. Emmett Monroe built it to last, and it's not going to fail us now." I hoped I was telling the truth. The storm lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of unrelenting rain and wind, of thunder that shook the ground, of lightning that turned the stairwell entrance into a strobe-lit portal. 6 hours of sitting in the dark, listening to our shelter get tested by forces I couldn't control or negotiate with. When it finally passed, when the rain stopped and the wind dropped and the first pale light of morning started filtering down, I climbed out to survey the damage. The lean-to was half collapsed. One wall had given up entirely, the boards scattered across the muddy ground. The tarp had torn free from 2 corners and wrapped itself around the chimney like a flag of surrender. The salvaged lumber I'd carefully stacked against what remained of the house foundation was scattered across 50 feet of field, driven there by wind or water, or both. One of the foundation corners had washed out. Stones tumbled into new channels the rain had carved through what had been level ground just yesterday. I stood there, soaked and shaking and exhausted, looking at the wreckage of everything I'd built, and wanted to quit. Wanted to take Maya's hand and walk back to town and find a shelter, a system, some kind of official help that would make decisions for us and tell us where to be and what to do. But then I heard footsteps behind me, felt Maya's hand slip into mine. She was looking at the wreckage, too, her small face serious and thoughtful. "We can fix it," she said quietly. "Right?" And in that moment, looking down at my 7-year-old daughter who trusted me to have answers, who believed I could make things work despite all evidence to the contrary, I knew I couldn't quit. "Yeah," I said, squeezing her hand. "We can fix it. If this restoration story has you hooked, hit-like, it helps us bring more lost places back to life." Chapter 7. The Revelation Rebuilding. After the storm took 2 weeks of concentrated work. The foreman at the construction site, whose name I learned was actually Raymond, let me take more scrap when I explained what had happened. He even helped me load the wheelbarrow with better lumber, straighter boards, longer pieces, wood that hadn't been exposed to weather and animals for decades. "Storm hit your place pretty good?" he asked. "Took down most of what I'd built," I admitted. "But the foundation held. The cellar's fine." He nodded, thoughtful. "Emmett built to last. My grandfather knew him, said he was particular about things. Measured twice, cut once, that whole philosophy." He added a bag of nails to my wheelbarrow. "These are new. Take 'em. Call it an investment in historical preservation." A man from the church, and Father Mike, though he insisted I call him just Mike, showed up 2 days later with a roll of better tarp, the heavy-duty kind used for commercial roofing, and a bag of concrete mix. "Heard you're trying to save the old Monroe place," he said, unloading supplies without being asked. "Good thing you're doing. Important thing. Land like that shouldn't go to waste or get swallowed by developers." "How does everyone know what I'm doing?" I asked. He smiled. "Small town. Also, your daughter talks about it at school. She's very proud of you, by the way. Told her whole class about finding the letters and the photographs." I reset the foundation stones, mixing the concrete by hand in a bucket, working slowly to get it right. One stone at a time, leveling carefully, using string lines and a carpenter's level Raymond had lent me. Anchored the stones deep, 2 feet down through mud to hardpan, building a base that wouldn't wash out again. While I worked, I noticed something I'd missed before. One of the foundation stones, larger than the others, cornerstone-sized, had been carved. Not the initials I'd seen before, but actual words, chiseled with patience into the limestone surface. "Seed box under the oak, for whoever comes next." I stopped working and looked around. There was an oak tree at the edge of the field, old and substantial, its trunk easily 3 feet across, its branches spreading in that particular architecture that comes from centuries of growth. I'd noticed it before, but hadn't thought much about it. Just another tree in a landscape full of them. Now I took a shovel and walked over, Maya following behind with questions I didn't yet have answers for. "Why would someone bury seeds?" she asked. "Maybe insurance," I said, starting to dig at the base of the tree, working carefully around the massive roots. "Maybe a gift. Maybe he knew someone would come looking someday." 3 feet down, my shovel hit something that wasn't soil or rock, metal. I dug more carefully, working with my hands, and pulled out a tin box about twice the size of the one in the cellar. It was sealed with wax around the edges, surprisingly intact, despite decades of burial. I pried it open carefully. Inside, wrapped in more oilcloth, were packets of seeds, maybe 24 of them, each one labeled in careful handwriting with not just the name, but planting instructions, spacing requirements, harvest times, beans, squash, tomatoes, peppers, herbs, the seeds of a garden, preserved and waiting, and beneath them, wrapped separately, a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Emmett Monroe's neat handwriting. I opened it carefully, aware that I was holding something private and precious. It was a farm journal, essentially. Notes about planting dates and harvest yields, soil conditions and weather patterns, successes and failures. But interspersed with the practical information were personal notes, observations, small glimpses into a life. "Beans came up strong this year. Betty says they're the best she's ever tasted. Lost the tomatoes to blight. Need to plan better rotation next season. First real frost today. Betty and I sat on the porch and watched winter arrive. She said she's never been happier. I believe her. The entry stopped in late 1952, then resumed briefly in April 1953. Betty's gone. Died in Portland on March 19th. I brought her back. Buried her under the oak where she loved to read in summer. Can't stay here without her. Everything I see reminds me of her hands, her voice, the way she moved through these rooms we built together. I'm leaving this for whoever finds it someday. The land is good. The cellar is sound. The well still draws sweet water. Someone will need this place. Someone will understand what it means to have roots, to build something that lasts. Plant these seeds. They're from Betty's garden, saved from the best plants. She would want them to grow again, to feed someone, to mean something. Finish what I couldn't. Not just the house, but the living, the being here, the making of a home from stones and lumber and hope. This place deserves better than grief and absence. Give it life. E.M. I closed the journal and sat in the dirt, the seed packets spread out around me, and cried for the first time since Maya's mother had left us 2 years ago. Cried for Emmett and Betty, for the life they'd built and lost. Cried for myself and Maya, for all the shelter hopping and uncertainty and fear. Cried because sometimes grief and hope get tangled together and you can't separate them anymore. Dad? Maya said softly, sitting down beside me. Are you okay? Yeah, I said, wiping my eyes. I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I showed her the seed packets, explained what they meant. We're going to plant a garden, Betty's garden, and we're going to finish what Emmett started.